Thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you all today. So excited to support Roca in this mission. And I think the most appropriate place to start is it is not lost on me where we find ourselves currently geopolitically. It has been a tough time with COVID. We've had a lot of uncertainty, a lot of loss. We've also had a rise in racial tension, and there has been really a disruption in the relationship between law enforcement and the community. Lucky for us, Roca has been ahead of the curve in really paying attention to this dynamic. We understand that in order for whole communities to heal, in order for people to heal, there has to be keen attention paid to specific things like community violence, like trauma. And so here's where I'll start today. I'm a psychiatrist. I spend a lot of time, actually the last 17 years, helping whole communities heal. And what I can tell you is that there's a component that oftentimes gets left out when we think about this healing process. We've had several folks talk about the process of healing, but it occurs to me that no one has ever talked about what conditions must be set in order for optimal healing to take place. So let's start here. Fear. What is it? Oftentimes we talk about it, we have all experienced it, and if I were sitting with you today, I'd lean in and say, is anyone among us here today never been afraid? And you'd probably look at me and say, that's just a ridiculous question, but the reality is, we've all been afraid. We've all been afraid, and we know what that feels like. To be afraid means that we're not thinking. To be afraid means that we are not able to concentrate. To be afraid means that our safety has been compromised. And so what we understand from a neuroscientific perspective is that to be afraid is meaningful until it's not. To be afraid allows us to seek safety appropriately. But the question is, what happens when this time-limited and threat-limited response, fear, is on all of the time? Fear on all of the time is trauma. Lucky for us, Roca gets that. They understand what trauma is. And they also further understand that specific psychosocial stressors like racism, like poverty, like the things that happened to folks before they ever had control over it. What we understand is that there are many things that shape the trajectory of our brains, how we operate, the risk for violence. All of those things are predetermined in some sense, depending on who you are and where you grew up, which we had no control over. Some folks had no control over. So if we are to move towards optimal healing and to do what the mission for Roca is, which is to disrupt violence by addressing trauma first, through a very specific cognitive behavioral therapeutic model, meeting folks where they are, finding community where it is, being persistent, not giving up, believing in the young people and the young emerging adults, believing that they can change, not operating in the soft bigotry of low expectation. We expect and believe that communities and folks who are impacted by urban violence can rise to the occasion, that they can meet the moment, that they can be the brilliant, healed, functional human beings that they deserve to be. And that comes with intentionality. So Roca has also thought very specifically about not just the person. We're going to help communities and people, but we also must work with systems. Since 1988, let's do the math. This is 2021. That is a long time, 3 decades of doing the work, of meeting people, but more importantly, of thinking actively about what it means to change and to facilitate a change process. It means that we are in a space where we are open to understanding the new knowledge that evolves over time and being willing to use it and employ it meaningfully. We now know from neuroscience and how the brain develops that the external environment around us impacts who we are and who we become. So Roca says what we must do is work with those environments, change the systems, and help to change the trajectory of the young folks and the young adults that we seek to serve. So there is now the Roca Impact Institute. The Roca Impact Institute essentially moves to help multiple systems, like law enforcement, like education, like the child welfare system, helping folks to understand this phenomenon. It goes back to what I said initially, creating the conditions for healing. So here we are. It's 2021. There have been many things that have happened that are still happening. We have a tremendous opportunity, but we also have a tremendous responsibility. And I could not help but to think about Ta-Nehisi Coates and his book, Between the World and Me, and to think about some of the young adults that Roca serves and how their experience may parallel his. When Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote this book, he wrote it to his son, but specifically he talked about his experience with fear. And it was, can you imagine, this is what I want to ask, can you imagine what it would be like that every single relationship you have, the relationship with your parents is fear, the relationship with the community is fear, the relationship with school is fear. If you can imagine a life that is just completely consumed and shaped by fear, then it is not absolutely outside of the realm of possibility to understand how toxic that can be on someone's life. As we further think about the mission of Roca and what it was designed to do, which is to disrupt urban violence through relationships, through connection, through focus on trauma, through creating safety, it is important to note that when we do these things to break the cycle of violence, it's important to note the focus on meeting unmet need. And what do I mean by that? Roca has been very intentional in ensuring that not only we serve the individual to ensure that they get support, both psychologically and emotionally, but they're also ensuring that there are very real, practical, pragmatic supports. Maslow tells us in 1940 that essentially in order for any of us to be able to brush up against the edges of what we call self-actualization or to be fulfilled, that we all have to have basic needs met. Well, what are those basic needs? Food, water, shelter, safety, both psychological and physical and financial. And above that, love and belonging. This idea of being connected, of being seen, of being heard and valued, this idea of being met where you are, all important elements of the success of this organization. The stats are clear. Recidivism rates are low. Roca has helped connect young adults to education, to employment. They have helped whole communities move towards greater healing. And we should celebrate that. We know that there are structural and complex challenges, and that those structural and complex challenges require a structural and complex approach. And that is why the parallel tracks of systems-based work and people work is incredibly important. I want to leave you with this quote, because I think that it definitely sums up what Roca represents. It's a quote by George Bernard Shaw. And George Bernard Shaw says that progress is impossible without change. And those who cannot change their minds cannot change anything. It is clear that we've been able to change our minds, that we've been open to a process, that change is evident and will continue to progress because we've got organizations like Roca committed. So it is, I am, and I hope that you are grateful of the work that Roca is doing in its intentionality in addressing the fear and reducing it and placing the management of trauma first in centering safety. Because it's important work. It's heart work, H-E-A-R-T, and we are so grateful for that. So as I sort of move forward to encourage you to think about what we can do, because Roca's doing its part, I think we have a part to do as well. There is an opportunity for all of us to begin again. And I think about a quote actually that Dr. Glaude, who wrote a book called Begin Again, looked very specifically at James Baldwin and what James Baldwin did in the 1960s and his work around equity and paralleled that to the times that we find ourselves in today. And I want to paraphrase the quote because I think it's appropriate. It is that in order for us all to move towards change, which is what I believe compelled our presence here today at this gathering, we're all here because we believe that change is possible and we want to contribute to it. But James Baldwin said, in paraphrase, he says, the one thing, even though times are tough, which they are tough, but not impossible, says that even though times are tough. The one thing that is not lost is responsibility. And in that statement is hope. And why? Because responsibility cannot be lost. It can only be abdicated. And to the extent that we accept our responsibility, we can begin again. This moment, this time, the Roca Impact Institute, the systems-based work, the focus on trauma, the need to heal, the understanding that systems change when people change, and people change when they feel something, is incredibly important, and it gives us a unique opportunity to begin again. Thank you.